Welcome to We Married the Family. Today's episode is a discussion of the popular Pakistani drama Jama Taqseem, which follows Leila and Qais, a new couple who married for love but come from very different families and start their marriage living in a joint family system. I'm joined by Maliha Khan, who's a therapist and adjunct professor based in Houston, Texas. She works primarily with Swana and Muslim individuals and families and provides psychoeducation on generational patterns and building healthier relations through her speaking engagements, media features, and her Instagram platform, Mental Health with Maliha. We're really excited to be diving into an area that's close to home for both of us and for a lot of you who are listening as well. Thanks, Maliha, for being here today.
I'm really excited to be here with you. I'm glad that we're talking about such an important topic. I know it came out of a TV show of all places, but I think this show was a show that really speaks to a lot of people. I have heard so many people reach out and say, "Hey, Maliha, watch this show." A lot of my friends were telling me, "Hey, I know you don't watch Pakistani dramas because I really don't, but I think you'd be really interested in this one. It really has an accurate depiction of what it means to live in a multi-generational home and what it is like for young couples to navigate those dynamics." And I thought, when I started the show, okay, it's going to be the typical Pakistani drama, but truly they show a lot of the realities of what it means to live in this type of a structure. And I wanted to continue this conversation. So then I reached out to you because I figured who better to talk to about this than someone who works with daughter-in-laws and has that community. Your work has been so valuable for a lot of people, and it's something that I generally use in my own practice. So I think it's really wonderful that we're here together to talk about this topic.
Me and my husband watched it together, which was really nice. I don't think I would have been able to watch it if I was still living with my in-laws. I think it would have been quite difficult. Like you said, it's a really good reflection of the reality of a lot of women's lives, a lot of families' lives. And I guess in this, what I really love about it is that it does have a very wide perspective. So it's not just one person's view, the focus is not just on one character's story. Obviously, we've got the main characters, but it really gives you an insight into different people's perspectives, and you see more of a bird's eye picture of a multi-generational home, a joint family system, which I absolutely loved. And I have to hats off to the characters, like the house help as well. They had their little parts to play, the younger generation as well. And we'll come on to some of that because I feel like the intergenerational aspect was really well shown throughout the show.
Yeah. 100%. And I think that's why this show has become so popular, because it really speaks to so many people. People feel like, hey, this is either my story, or this is a story of what my mom went through, or what my sister is going through, or what my friend is going through, or I know that this happens in the South Asian community. But it resonates so deeply with people. And I think that's why the show is definitely worth watching if someone is listening to this and they haven't started it. And I will say this, we're going to be, there's going to be a lot of spoilers throughout the podcast, so just
if you haven't seen it, don't listen to this yet.
Yes, exactly. Or if you're bothered by spoilers, I'm someone who is totally fine with spoilers, so it doesn't, I don't mind it. But I know a lot of people will say, "Don't tell me. Hey, don't tell me that. I don't want to know." So if that's you, maybe wait until you're much deeper into the show to listen to the podcast.
Okay, so for those who haven't watched it, even those who have watched it, just a little recap, that the drama follows, like I mentioned, newly married couple. The woman, interestingly, she's an only child. One of the reasons why his family dynamic doesn't seem to bother her at the beginning is because she's really yearning for that closeness and that connection. And you really get a sense of how lonely she has felt in her own home because of the emotional absence of her parents and also not having siblings. So she's looking for that connection and she's looking for that family life, which makes it quite exciting initially for her from the beginning. But obviously then things do quickly change. Whereas he does have his reservations. He does sort of warn her at the beginning. She does get some warnings from people. Like, are you sure? There's a lot of people in the house, this is the kind of family we have. And so he's got 3 brothers. He's the youngest of 3 brothers who are also married, also have children. So there's about 11 people in total living in that house. So you can imagine even that is such a huge contrast in itself. And when people are so in love, you don't necessarily think of the logistics, the practicality, the routines, the lifestyles. You just think, this is the person that I want to be with. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's an indication as to actually there are things that we need to look at further afield, especially if you are going to be going into the family system yourself.
Right, right. And I think they even, I think Layla even mentions that at the beginning of the show, that our love is something that will conquer all. You
Mm,
know, that yes, these are some challenges that we might face, but we're going to convince your parents, or if they have an issue with this, it's okay, we'll talk to them. She's very hopeful, and we see Cass being someone who's a little bit more anxious, a little bit more worried, and it might be because he's had to navigate those dynamics for a longer period of time. So for him, that's the way that he learned how to go about that system. Whereas for Layla, it's a very different type of reality. Her voice is generally more heard. Her parents aren't necessarily present, and yet she does say that historically her parents would really listen to and value her opinion. So she's coming in with, oh, I can have this conversation with my parents. Whereas for Guess, it's like unheard of, or he feels even disrespectful, or he's scared that it's going to come off as disrespectful because that's how his parents perceive the same type of conversation.
yeah, it's interesting because then that makes me think of the learned behaviors when it comes to communication and
Hmm.
relationships between children and parents. Because
Right.
with Layla, she's got that openness. She's got this
Right.
unfiltered way of expressing herself, but in a very respectful way as well. Um,
Hmm.
whereas with Gus, he's got limitations already, and actually, she does support him in breaking through some of those
Oh
limitations
yeah.
that he's learned from his own family dynamics, like what you can say, what you can't say, what you can ask
Right.
for, what you can't ask for. But
Right.
she's very strong. Like, I do
Oh
really love her
yes.
character. Like, she's really strong. She knows herself. She knows her values. She's very
Hmm.
fair as well. I find that
Hmm.
she doesn't have an agenda like what a
Right.
lot of people think, that when a daughter-in-law comes in, she gets labeled in certain ways as though she's going to come and cause mischief. And we hear this a lot from the
Hmm.
other daughter-in-laws in the house who, they whisper amongst each other, and they whisper with the
Hmm.
mother-in-law, and they say, like, girls these days, or girls who are educated. So it makes
Right.
these really sweeping statements that paint her in a negative light without actually even getting to know her in the first place, which obviously it's really unfair, but it is very common for that to happen.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's very true. It is something that they continuously talk about throughout the show. That is something that honestly, it's much later in the show when that perspective starts to shift, and
Mm,
a lot happens before that even takes place. A lot of disagreements and a lot of turmoil. Honestly, it's not a smooth ride for Lila and Kez at all.
no, I do find his growth quite. It's a bit like pulling teeth, you know.
Oh yes.
And I can see this. I mean, I see this a lot with women that I work with. So I do predominantly work with women, and we know, I mean, there are trends in therapy, like with women seeking therapy more than men,
Right.
women having a different type of emotional relationship with themselves as well, and emotional awareness. There's a lot of teaching. I feel like she teaches him a lot of
Mhm.
different ways of being and
Mhm.
relating and expressing, and he takes it on board, which is amazing and supportive. He doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily prevent her or inhibit her and stop her from saying and doing the things that she's asking and requesting, or things that she's finding challenging. Like, he is there to support her, which
Mhm.
is amazing, even if he doesn't quite know how to, or
Right,
if he's
right. I
not
think he
done it
tries.
before. He's up for the challenge for his
Right,
of his marriage.
right. One thing that I did notice with him is that he is generally more connected and united with Layla when he's with Layla.
Mm,
So whenever they're having those private conversations with each other, he's very much aligned with her way of thinking and really on board working with her as a team. And then when he goes into his family system and then he hears the other perspective, he starts getting swayed. And then he starts thinking, oh, wait, this is the right way. And then he brings that back to Layla sometimes and then puts those expectations on Layla as well. The example of, hey, you really don't have to go to this job interview. My parents just
mm,
got here, which was such a big thing because they had talked about her working after she got married and her looking for a job and her using her education, like her really wanting that as a part of her life. And then he was totally on board with it. And yet when the time came, he was asking her to give that up. And then he got frustrated with her afterwards that she wasn't at home taking care of his parents the way that he had expected a woman to do.
yeah,
So
he
while
kind
he
of
does try.
He
Yeah, he kind of
flip-flops
flip-flops, and
between,
that's why
yeah.
it's kind of like what you said, the pulling teeth, you know? It's like, "Come on, are you here? Are you there?" But I think that is such a common experience for a lot of South Asians, you know, because if we live in a system where there are so many, rigid expectations, it can put a lot of pressure when there's conditional love, when there's, controlling behavior. Sometimes it can put a lot of pressure on children, and despite how, you know, how old or young they are, some of us will carry that into adulthood, and it can be very difficult for us to then take a stand. And that is consistent for Gaz throughout the show. Even at the beginning when he, you know, his parents were like, "Hey, we want you to marry this girl." And he doesn't even mention, "Hey, I'm actually talking to
Yeah.
someone, or I'm interested in someone." The entire news of Lela comes from one of the younger girls, you know, his nieces, finds out, she overhears a conversation that he's having with his friend on the phone, and then she goes and tells her mom, and then the news spreads that way. And then he has to face the music. You know, it wasn't something that he was able to do himself. It was something that was brought to him.
Yeah. I guess a couple of things that I want to touch on from that is one, the gender differences within the house. And you've mentioned about the work, the agreement that they had as a couple,
Mhm.
that, she would continue to work. But then the way that females in his home haven't followed that, they've followed a different path, a more traditional path.
Right.
And then also the fear that people have
Mhm.
in the system, because that runs through not just the females, but the men as well. I feel like there's a lot of the male process, and the male perspective was really highlighted, because nobody is spared from the system.
Right.
The
Right.
impact that the system has on an individual is not just causing issues for the daughter-in-law, it impacts the children, the men,
Oh, yes.
like every couple dynamic is affected by it. I see this again in my work a lot, where a woman comes into the family and, she's very independent. She knows herself very well. She knows what she wants. But when she moves in, and I guess this is what happens in the show as well, the expectations of the family start to overshadow her own wants and her own needs.
Mhm.
There are things
Mhm.
that she might have envisioned for her future, but then it quickly becomes about the family. And we can see Layla doing that initially, where she's changing her outfits because of what people are saying to her and about how she should dress.
Right.
But it's in simple things like that. And at the beginning, she does, because she's trying to adjust, like we all do.
Mhm. Mhm.
And she's compromises on certain things. So it was
Right.
interesting to see that, because actually that wasn't something I expected from her at the beginning.
Considering how, like we said, she's has such a firm way, like, belief in herself. You know,
Mm,
she's really grounded in her values, and because of the confidence that she does come in with, it's really disheartening. Honestly, for me, it was very disheartening to see her sense of self start corroding in that through those expectations. We can see how she's really trying. She changes the way that she dresses. She says, "Hey, this feels a little odd to me. Do I have to do this all the time? Okay, fine. I guess I'll do it." And
mm,
then, you know, the expectation of cooking, she says, "I've never cooked in this way. How am I going to do this?" She messes up. She doesn't, you know, her roti is like not wonderful. And I
mm.
know that's one of the classic examples everyone loves to use in the South Asian culture about how perfect your roti is.
Yeah. Oh my gosh,
But
that
it's
the scene,
not.
the scene with her in the kitchen, and she's like, okay,
Yes.
and how happy the other daughter-in-laws were to kind of put all the load on her without
Yeah.
even supporting her, without saying to
Right.
her, okay, actually, you don't know how to do this, let me show you. Or,
Right.
okay, this is
Right.
new to you, but this is how we do it here. I
Right.
thought people would have a little bit more of a, she's a new bride, this is her first time,
Right.
she doesn't cook, and she's expected to cook a dinner for 11 people.
Right.
And
Exactly.
they've just left her there by herself, and obviously guests
Right.
at work. And I'm sort of like, why is he not saying to her that she doesn't have to do this if it's so hard?
Right.
But I mean, hats off to her. She pushed through, she persevered, she wanted to prove to herself and other people that she could do this.
For me, it was also when she really starts questioning herself, that there's something wrong with her. And I think that is a very common experience for a lot of South Asian daughter-in-laws who live in these types of dynamics. Eventually, if the problematic behavior does not change, it can be very corrosive to a person's sense of who they are. Their identity and their self-confidence really takes a hit. And I think that's something that is worth talking about.
This is something that happens over time as well.
Mhm.
We see initially the time period between her moving in and then deciding to move out is about 3 months.
Right.
And in that time, she's faced a lot of challenges. She's faced criticism. You
Mhm.
see her, kind of in her room crying by herself, not being able to sleep. So you can see that it is taking quite a toll on her mental health, her emotional well-being. But she managed to move and, take a stand.
Mhm.
But often people stay in situations like this for such a long period of
Oh,
time.
yes.
3 months is actually very, very short.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but people can stay in these dynamics, facing these kinds of situations without any change for years,
Mhm. Mhm.
5 years, 10
Mhm.
years, 20 years. And the impact that that has on their identity and who they are is huge, because women do lose themselves in dynamics like this. And
Right, right. That is something that is constantly reinforced because that is valuable. That's considered to be valuable. When you lose
Mhm.
yourself in that work and in that role, that is something that is praised. And we see that with the other daughter-in-laws, how they talk about their sacrifices and all the hard work that they put in and how well they adjusted to the system and how much they let go of them of their wants and needs for the sake of the family, and how that gives them almost like a gold medal for the perfect daughter-in-law. They
Yeah.
really take that title on. And I think that's why that system or that cycle continues to perpetuate. On one hand, you see them wanting to be like Lela. They want to dress like her. They want the benefits and the freedoms that she's asking for. And at the same time, they have such a hard time working with her, like you said, even in helping her, supporting her. But even, hey, it's been, our family has been functioning in this way for such a long time, but maybe we want something different. So how can we all come together to make that happen? That does not exist in the show at all.
Yeah,
It
there
is
isn't
very
that sort
much
of
watching out for themselves.
cooperation. Yeah. The emphasis on family and unity is there. I mean, that's sort of in the title as well. I had to Google
Hmm.
what it means, but
Right,
it's
right.
being united and being divided, like being together,
Yes.
being separate.
Right.
And so much of the experiences of the women, especially in this household, like you're saying, it is about self-sacrifice,
Mhm.
because that's what maintains the system as well. And we see that when Leila puts her foot down and she says that, I can't live here anymore,
Mhm.
we start to hear the truths from other people as well, not just the women, but
Right.
even like one of the sons who actually didn't want to work in the family business. She is really the catalyst for change in this family. And if she hadn't been true to herself, then the other women also wouldn't have been able to get the changes
Mhm.
that they had felt unable to express
Right.
until she arrived.
Right, right. And I think we see that so much in family systems. It feels like I'm just one person. How can I create change in my life when the system itself is the way that it is? And I don't want to say that it's one individual's responsibility. Of course, the responsibility falls on everybody in that system. And yet, sometimes, if the system is not changing, if we change ourselves slowly, the people around us have to create some type of a change because we have changed within ourselves.
And that's the thing with change. Change is hard, and we see how resistant
Oh,
pretty much
yes.
every single person is to change in this family.
Hmm.
And when we do try and change something, inevitably we're going to face resistance. The question then is, do you keep pushing for that change,
Hmm.
or do you then get sort of squashed by the resistance? And it's really hard because it can take a lot out of an individual. And in this case, like we mentioned, Leila's husband is very supportive, and he does speak for her. He does advocate for
Hmm.
her. He is looking out for her. But when a woman doesn't have that, it can be quite easy then to self silence
Hmm.
and lose hope,
Mhm,
become quite
mhm,
helpless. One thing that Leila does have is support, whether it's from
mhm.
her husband or from her parents as well.
And those things are monumental. When we're doing this work with people, we do encourage them to seek out support in different relationships. So if we're not able to receive it within the home that we live in, are there people in their lives that can be those pillars that they can kind of lean on? And we
Mm.
see that, like you said, granted, Lela did have that in her spouse. Yes, he wasn't, the most aligned with her or able to stand firm throughout the show very consistently, but he tried. He really did, and in the end, it always came back to, "Hey, I'm going to maintain that united front with my partner."
Mm.
John and Julie Gottman talk about that idea of the united front and how that's one of the foundations of a healthy marriage. So if there are issues, we talk about them in private. We have each other's back in public. We are connected with one another, and we face the world through that. And they do really try to do that, which is wonderful that Lela has that support in her spouse. But if someone doesn't have that, then it's important for them to see what other relationships in their lives can allow them to have that support so that it doesn't again corrode at who they are as a person.
Yeah.
Because if these dynamics don't change, then long term, like you said, it creates this helplessness. And then sometimes it's like, okay, this is just going to be my life and I have to live in it. And then you hear, like, dadis and nannies, like grandmothers, who are talking about, oh, back in my day, this is like nothing, I had to go through so much, and perpetuates the same cycle over and over again.
I guess this is how an example of how people's own experiences then influence the kind of advice and influence that they have on other people. People will only be able to advise you from
Oh
their own
yes.
experiences. If
Right.
somebody hasn't walked the path that you want to walk,
Mm-hmm.
they're not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily the person that's going to give you the most helpful advice.
And I think that's why it's painful for people to really sit with the reality that, hey, some of these people might be my parents. So I
Yeah.
might want these things to be different. I might even say it out loud to them. I might even try to do that in the most respectful way possible. And yet they might not be able to meet me where I'm at. And
Mm,
that's a very painful reality for people to sit with, because we want that connection in our communities. We want that connection with
yeah.
our parents and with our family. That's something that is so important and valuable to us. So it's a really deeply painful reality to sit with. Hey, there are limitations to
Mm.
what I can expect of this other person. But then that also, once the person is able to really grieve, it gives us information on, okay, given this new reality, what does this actually mean for me moving forward in this connection with this person?
Deeper than the connection, there's something about belonging. If you say in a
Mhm.
joint family
Mhm.
system, there's this whole unit that's being created for the family, and each member learns what they need to do to belong in the family and to
Right.
keep their place in the family. I think this
Mhm.
is where some of what we've already talked about, the fear of change,
Mhm.
the difficulty in being able to express yourself and to advocate for yourself as well, can be fueled by this fear of being cast out,
Mhm.
which we see in
100%.
here as well, when things do start to change, how harsh the father is towards his children. And I mean, some of the words he says, I'm just like, oh gosh, that
Yeah.
it cuts
I
really deep.
know.
Like,
It
he will
really
say,
does.
actually, a son who leaves his parents' home has no place for grief. I'm
Yes.
not going to grieve for a son
Right.
who's left his parents and left his home. And it's
Right.
very, it's like the ultimate betrayal or the ultimate abandonment
Mhm.
for the
Mhm.
parents, for different reasons.
Mhm.
I mean, I can see how much the father has invested of his life, his money, his emotions
Mhm.
into creating the family as it was and as it had
Oh,
been
yes.
before the change occurred. So obviously, it's really, really painful for him to accept that the reality is changing.
Oh,
Uh,
yes. 100%.
for the mother as well, her
Mm.
whole identity is shaped by her family, her role as a
Mm.
mother, and having her children close to her. So everything went into creating a home and looking after the
Right.
children. And for that then to be not taken away, but for it to, well, I guess maybe it feels like that for her. Like, this is taken, I
Ah,
no longer
yes.
have this in my life.
Right.
This thing that
Right.
gave me so much purpose and love and joy and meaning
Mhm. Mhm.
is not mine anymore.
Dad says that in some ways, like, he says this statement that really kind of stuck with me, that and I think it's even in the trailer itself. So if you watch the trailer for the show, you'll see it pop up, that he didn't think that his upbringing was so fragile that it would be uprooted by a small storm. He
Mm,
talks about the small storm he's referring to is Layla. And in reality, we know that's not really the case. It's not Layla coming into the system and wreaking this havoc, becoming a tornado that splits the family apart. It's actually her coming in. She might be able to state, hey, this is something that feels a little bit odd to me, or hey, maybe privacy is an important thing to consider. We shouldn't just barge into people's rooms.
mm,
Basic things, basic things really in relationships. And but they feel foreign to this family system because they're so used to being and functioning in that way. So
mm,
when she comes in, it really, it really shakes up their idea of what they thought was the perfect home that they, like you said, put in so much energy and effort to create. And
yeah.
I found it very sad. I honestly cried in the moment where Gus is saying that he's leaving, and his dad says something like, and this is me translating, of course, "Whoever leaves this house, it has left my heart."
Mm,
And he says that, and then he goes around the corner and he waits to hear if his kids will leave, and he hears their footsteps, walking away, he starts crying.
mm,
And in my mind, I was thinking, man, you love your kids, and yet you won't let them see that vulnerability. You allow yourself to be vulnerable with them in that way.
mm,
You won't let them see your sadness. You just show the harshness, and
mm,
you use these words that cut so deep, like you said.
yeah. And there are so many precious moments in the show. I think that I was pleasantly surprised by how touching some of
Mm,
the interactions were, and when the grandchildren are saying goodbye to their
yes.
grandfather as well,
Oh,
and
yes.
it's really, really emotional
Yeah.
moments to go through, and it's not just hurtful for one person, it's hurtful for the whole system. But on the other side of the hurt, once things can run their course, I guess, once people
Mm,
start processing in whatever way
mm,
what's happening,
mm-hmm,
things start to change. Like, we don't necessarily get stuck in an emotional state
mm-hmm,
forever.
mm-hmm.
And I think this
Right.
show does quite well in showing that as well. Like, yes, there's a lot of difficulty, but eventually things do start to change. And we see this, I think, most evidently when, I guess, his parents come and stay at his house, and obviously
Mm-hmm.
Leila's parents are there as well.
Right, right.
I mean, those scenes were some of the most entertaining
Oh,
in
yeah.
the culture. Like, I absolutely loved their quibbles and their
Yeah.
tiffs at the dinner table.
Right.
It's like, oh gosh, are these grown people? Like, are these?
Right, right.
It was absolutely, yeah, really entertaining, but also shows how actually change in a positive way is
Mm,
possible as well, even after a really difficult and challenging process. Um,
right,
there's a lot
right.
of bruised egos as well, I would say. I mean,
Mm-hmm,
from the father in particular, I do notice a lot of pride. And I think what you're saying in terms of him not showing his vulnerability to his children, I think
mm-hmm,
there's something of that state or emotion of pride that gets in
mm-hmm,
the way of that.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, 100%. I'm with you on that. It is, you're right. That moment where the parents really kind of come together. At first it's just messy when they are
Mm.
living under the same roof. And of course the circumstances that result in that are not something that they signed up for. It was health issues. And this is something that we do see in the South Asian community, that, if our parents get sick or if they need our support physically as well, we rise up to that occasion and we show up and we try to take care of them in
Yeah.
the way that we can. And that looks different for everybody. Of course, some people might be able to have their parents come live with them. Some people might be able to provide support through other means, financially or with time or physically being present with them and taking care of them physically. It looks different for everybody, but we really see the change, because it almost feels like when the family starts kind of splitting, and each son goes and into their own direction and their families go into their own directions, it feels like this is how it's going to be and they'll never be able to come back together. Guess I will say, I think it's wonderful that Lela and Gas are grounded in, hey, we want to maintain respect and value of our parents. They
Yeah.
can be upset with us and we can still try. And here are healthy ways to try. Here's what we can do that's healthy. So how do I, show up without overextending myself to the point where it's going to make me sick? Of course, we can't completely cut ourselves off from that connection with another person. We know there's tons of research that shows how our nervous systems get regulated and dysregulated by the people around us, and
Mm.
specifically our connection with our parents and our connections with our spouses. Those are so monumental to our health.
Yeah.
But we really see that, the Kes and Lela kind of showing up in that way, and it's wonderful to see those slow changes come about. It's
Mm.
not something that happens overnight, of course. It
No.
takes time. But
Yeah.
it's something wonderful to see, even within the parents and how they talk to each other. At first, they're
Yeah.
just going at it with each other, and then they say, "Oh, wait a second, maybe there's some value in, doing this or trying this new activity, or learning how to cook." My
Yeah.
favorite moment actually was when Lela's mom suggests to Cas's mom, "Hey, maybe you should consider opening up a YouTube channel for
Yeah.
cooking."
Oh gosh,
And
I
she's
love,
like,
yeah, I love
"What?"
that.
But
Yeah.
I thought it was so wonderful because she starts seeing the value in a different way of living.
Mm.
And, we were talking about gendered expectations before. There is that expectation of women being the caretakers, but nowadays in the modern world, there's also an expectation that being a caretaker is less than a woman who is working. And I
Mm.
think that is also problematic because it really pins women against each other or pins different roles and makes one more valuable than the other one. That's not really the case. But we see the two women really finding value in each
Yeah.
other's own way of functioning. And I think that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. And I really liked how Leila does this with her own mum, because her mum from the outset has her walls up. She has
Yes.
judgments about the family
Yes.
and the women and the mother-in-law, and putting them together in the same. I mean, I couldn't have imagined that was going to
I
happen,
know.
but it
I
was
know.
it was amazing. Um, but like you're saying, it really gave them a chance to actually connect with each other beyond their assumptions and judgments of
Yes.
of one another. And actually, what you get from that is new relationships forming
Yes.
in a very loving and affectionate way as well. I mean, I also loved the relationship between the fathers and how
Mm-hmm.
they were sort of teaching each other things and,
Yes.
kind of unlocking things within each other that maybe they wouldn't have done if they continued
Right.
life by themselves or just kept to themselves, even in that shared space. Um,
Right.
and I think Layla does this really well with her own mum as well, where she challenges her mum's quite rigid views,
Mm-hmm.
what it
Mm-hmm.
means to be a woman, what it means to be a successful woman. For her, it's very career oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
when we put ourselves into either camp, and I guess
Right.
this is where some feminist theories as well, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
feminism, it did have a point where it went a bit too far, where actually it did
Yes.
start only advocating for women who are in the workplace and
Right.
seeing anything that didn't look like Western liberalism
Right.
for women, anything other than that was as though it was oppressive. Whereas actually,
Mm-hmm.
a woman, if she's choosing, she wants to stay at home, she wants to be with the family, she wants to take on these certain roles, and she's doing that of her own accord. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Right.
completely different experience to if she is forced into a role, if
Right.
she has no choice in a role. And I think the choice is probably the fundamental part
Mm-hmm.
in this as well. And I really like how Lila challenges her mum, but also her friends. So she makes a new friend, a neighbor,
Right.
when she moves
Yeah.
house, and that friend is quite dead set
Oh
against
yeah.
never letting her in-laws into her house,
Mm-hmm.
holding on to a lot of anger and hurt. We don't know much of her story, but
Right.
holding on to a lot of difficult experiences that she's had with her in-laws. And
Mm-hmm.
it's one thing that's really funny, and me and my husband will laugh at this a lot. She would always say, Meri ammi kehti hai. Meri ammi. She's like, oh, my mother
Yes,
says,
she
my mother
does.
says. And
Right.
you
Yes.
can see
Yeah.
that actually the way that people are influenced by the
Yeah.
generations before them. And actually, as individuals, it's up to us to use our critical thinking, to use our own judgment and
Mm-hmm.
things that we learn, having open minds that can be adaptive to change and can take in new information, not just information that feeds our narratives. Because
Right.
actually, for that woman, I mean, to have a friend like Lila, I think that was really
Oh yeah.
helpful for her, because she didn't collude with a lot of things that other people were saying, but
Right.
actually she challenged, she questioned, she gave suggestions and advice that are actually really helpful. And I think that's really important in friendships as well, because
Right.
a lot of daughter-in-laws um, will make friends with other daughter-in-laws, and they might have a chat
Mm-hmm.
about their in-laws. And I think that's something
Mm-hmm.
for women to question as well, like, okay, actually, what kind of influence am I having on my friend who's struggling? And is this
Mm-hmm.
more difficult for her and her husband, or is it actually,
Right.
we were talking about the unity that families sort of aspire to, and
Mm.
the importance and significance that is given to having what looks like on the outside a
Oh yes.
cohesive and united household,
Mm-hmm.
when actually underneath there's a lot of things that are being overlooked and being ignored and being dismissed. And I think there's a point where Gus and Leila are having a bit of an argument, and she says, have you forgotten about the filth underneath the sparkling house?
Mm-hmm.
Something
Mm-hmm.
along those lines. And I thought that was so powerful, because
Oh
it
yeah.
is a theme that runs through our culture and the South Asian culture, where we have a real difficulty in looking at the mess within our homes,
Mm-hmm.
and not the dirty dishes and all of that. I mean, we have an issue
Mm-hmm.
with
Right.
that as
Right.
well, but
Sure. Sure.
the emotional
Yes.
mess of just
Yes.
being human. And we have a real
Right.
struggle with creating space for that, like for ourselves and for each other. And I think that
Right.
was a really, yeah, she couldn't have said it more, aptly and clearly,
Right.
that we can't just ignore all of the things that
Mm-hmm.
are underneath, because we try so hard sometimes to keep up appearances.
Mm-hmm.
I need to look a certain way, I need to look put together, my house needs to look put together and clean. And if I have those things in order, then everything looks on the surface as though it's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And
Right.
actually underneath that there could be all sorts going on. But yeah, we have a very strong way of hiding.
Mhm, mhm. And I think that comes from, what's considered to be valuable. Having being connected in that way is something that is considered to be valuable, and at the same time, the issue comes in when we engage in that all or nothing kind of thinking. That
Mm.
okay, if I have anything to say that it doesn't fall in line with how perfect this is, then that means I hate all of it. When that's not really the case, you know. We
Yeah.
can have both perspectives of, hey, I have issues with this thing, but I really love all these other things about living in this type of a system or having these types of connections. Hey, these things that my parents do might be frustrating, but I also love these things that I really cherish this part of our relationship. But
Mm,
that idea, you know, that okay, if I am critiquing anything, it means that I absolutely hate it and I don't want anything to do with it. That can be really limiting in what we can do with that information, or even limiting in how people can go about resolving conflicts, because
mm,
it just feels like the only way to cope with it is to get away. And I think that's more of like the Western kind of expectation that, you know, if it doesn't serve you, then maybe it's time that you step away from that
mm,
connection. And there are other options that people have, but people have to be kind of taught that hey, there are ways that you can have healthier conversations with your family. You don't
mm,
have to be stuck in the ways that have always existed. It's uncomfortable, of course, if we are going on that journey, and the journey that Layla and Kes go on. They're breaking generational cycles that have existed for centuries. It's
mm,
very difficult to create those kind of changes, and yet on the other side of that discomfort is something that is more meaningful, more of that interdependence that we talk about. So not just focusing on yourself and independence, and then not complete enmeshment where you're lost yourself, you know, to
mm,
those roles. Something in the middle that allows space for both parties. Kind of like what we said, the ways that the parents are engaging with each other once they kind of work through the
mm.
difficulties, and how they find value in the other person and in the differences, and find ways to stay connected regardless of those differences.
Yeah. I think that's really important, is creating space for the gray in life, because most of life happens in the in between spaces.
Mm-hmm.
If we find ourselves being on one end of the spectrum, then I think that's a place where we can question, are there things that I'm doing that are maybe not helping my connections? Am I holding myself back too much? Actually having conversations that don't necessarily need to have a resolution or a solution, but just
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of, let me hear what's going on for you. Let me understand
Mm-hmm.
what's happening. It can be really hard for a woman to bring up some of the issues that she's experiencing. And one of the reasons that is quite common is because they find that their husband often becomes defensive.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's okay. My wife has expressed something negative
Mm-hmm.
about my
Mm-hmm.
family and I don't want to hear it. But
Mm-hmm.
actually, what would be more helpful is using that as an opportunity to understand what your wife is going through, understand what your husband's going through, make it into more of a shared experience rather than it being as though you're enemies
Mm-hmm.
on
Right,
opposite
right.
sides. It's like, actually, you're both in this marriage together, you're both potentially living in this family together. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, you have your own perspectives and experiences and different relationships with members of the family. But by being defensive and not hearing each other, it's not going to go anywhere.
Right, right.
So it's, how do we
100%.
keep ourselves open when things feel challenging and uncomfortable? And it's obviously hard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's but
Right.
it,
Very
it is
hard.
it is really hard, yeah. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it.
Right,
I think there's
right.
some
Exactly.
we can build strength and resilience through that. We can build skills that we didn't have
Right.
before. Yeah.
Right.
And we're not
Yeah.
going to get it right all the time either.
Right. Exactly. Like we said, it's gonna be something that takes time, right?
Yeah.
And when we're going about, you know, trying something new, it's going to take a lot of trial and error. And I try to
Mm,
encourage people to keep that in mind, that we're not aiming for perfection. Even tiny changes are still changes and progress, and it's okay if it takes us a little while to figure things out. But
yeah.
it's important to keep in mind something that Dr. Mariel Bouquet kind of talks about in her book Break the Cycle. She talks about how to have these difficult conversations or try to create that safety within a family, how to create more of a deeper connection with our loved ones. So, really noticing what's happening within us when we're under stress and what's happening within our loved one when they're under stress. So, what we know from research that our bodies have certain types of responses to stress: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Mm,
And noticing, like, okay, if stress is happening, or I'm getting frustrated with something my family member is doing, maybe I'm the one who lashes out and my family member is the one who shuts down. When we know that information, then we can address our needs in a healthier way. And then we can have more healthy conversations with that person with time. But the first step really is to notice what's happening within us so then we can take care of it. And then also ask the other person, for just time together. Try to do things that really put back into the relationship moments where you can find that connection. Sometimes that looks like maybe not meeting within the same home that you felt the stress in. Maybe you need to go to a park outside, take a walk, do something that you can find connection through to allow more of that safety. And then if you have the opportunity over time, if it feels safe, asking the person, hey, I want to have a conversation with you about something that's important. Is this a good time for us to do that? Can we stay committed to having a healthy connection? And can we abort mission if it's not going in a positive direction? And we
Yeah.
can come back to it later, but we don't need to stay stuck in that lashing out and shutting down dynamic with each other,
Mm.
you know? And sometimes I will say people might decide to step away, and that happens in our community, that people, you know, it's unheard of, but when you really get to know someone, sometimes they might disclose that, hey, I haven't talked to my mom or dad in so many years, or my parents, you know, use a silent treatment with me, and I can live under the same roof with them, but they won't acknowledge me for months at a time.
Mm.
And at the same time, what we find through research is that people who go no contact or even low contact with their family, or engage in that in estrangement process, eventually do come back. Majority of the people eventually do come back.
Mm.
It does take time, but I think that just speaks to how meaningful our connections are with our loved ones, and specifically with the family that we grew up with.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be anywhere without our families, you know.
Mhm.
We are social beings as well, and
Mhm.
our being part of a group, being part of our family is so intrinsic to who we
Yeah.
are. And I guess in the West, where we have seen that trend of cutting people off, and you know, it can lead to a lot more isolation as well.
Mhm.
Being in family does offer a lot of support. You know, obviously, if relationships can get to a place where they are
Mhm.
healthy, but I
Right.
mean, a lot of times people do cut off because they feel unable to deal with the conflicts that are happening, or yeah, you know, they've been hurt too much by somebody, and
Mhm.
with some people, there might not be a way to come back. The
Right.
relationship might look completely different. It might
Yes.
be that you only see the person maybe a couple of times a year. And
Right.
I think even with in-laws as well, sometimes when women do move out, they then need to reorient themselves to, okay, what kind of
Mhm.
relationship do I want to have?
Mhm.
Especially at this point in time, because some women might need a bit of time apart
Mhm.
where you know they're
Yes.
not forced to go and visit their in-laws every single day after they've just moved
Right.
out. Like they might need
Right.
to sort of create a little bit of distance, but
Mhm.
that distance isn't there to never see each other again. I mean, for
Mhm.
some people,
Mhm.
I don't know, it might be, but generally, it's just trying to find a balance that works. You know, where
Mhm.
the woman feels like she has some choice and autonomy in how much she is seeing her in-laws and how much she's speaking to them, and also having some space as well.
Right, right. 100%. I think that even that space allows people to have more clarity on in really getting grounded with their own values and figuring out, how can I set boundaries? Sometimes we need to step away from that system to get that breathing room to then make those changes.
Mm,
Sometimes it's really hard to create those changes within the system. And it's different for everybody. So I don't want to say that there's one perfect way to go
yeah.
about this. Truly, that's not the case. We know that with each individual person, there's a different history and a reality that they're coming in with, so their reality or what their future looks like is going to be different than someone
Yeah.
else's.
There's no right or wrong. I think this is where people can struggle as well because they think, you know, a relationship should look a certain way. And this could be cultural, societal expectations. It could be the family's expectations or even the
Mhm.
individual's own expectations.
Mhm. Mhm.
Even questioning, okay, what have I been taught about relationships? How much of
Mhm.
that is still true for me and how much of it actually have I changed in my perspective? So one of the things that we did want to touch on, and we will bring a bit of a warning with this. It does show up in the episode, which again I felt it was an unexpected but really interesting and significant storyline
Mm.
that was to do with the experience of the children that were living in a joint family system. And obviously, children can get really overlooked when
Yeah.
there's multiple generations living together. And one of the experiences of the granddaughters was around being sexually harassed, sexually abused by her cousin. That was
Mhm.
also, you know, it was the son of the other
Mhm.
daughter-in-law who was living in the home. So we are going to explore this a little bit because this does happen in our communities, and it's important that
Mm.
we do talk about it because, like we've discussed, but also seen from the show, is that the only way that we create change is by talking about the things that usually are unspoken
Mhm.
and giving
Mhm.
voice to issues so that we can address them. And I think the responses of the individuals, obviously, there was a lot of alarm when people found out what was going on, but rightly so as well.
Right.
And people had different ways of, I guess, disciplining, different
Hmm.
conclusions that they came to.
Right.
And again, this theme of like rupture and repair, which has been
Hmm.
quite prominent in our episode today,
Hmm. Hmm.
also carries on with this. And, when something like this does happen to you or a family member, what do you do with it? And
Yeah, I think something that I found to be really sad was when Sidra, who this happens to, she's the one who experiences sexual assault by her cousin Zishan. She tries to reach out. She tries to use her voice to ask for help, and yet, when she tries to do that, her mom kind of shuts her down, and on several occasions she's constantly blamed as someone who is lazy or unmotivated to do well in school, and she can't make good grades. But we know in reality, when children are experiencing abuse, or in general when people experience abuse, it's really hard for our brains to be in the mode to learn, to
mm,
be able to focus, to be able to retain information. Our memory and our processing speed, they all take a hit. And that's what Sidra is actually experiencing. And then when she tries to advocate for herself, she's shut down. And I think that's the thing that you said. Children are often overlooked in these types of structures because the power generally is placed within the males, and then also the elders.
yeah,
They're the ones who get to have a say, and everyone else is kind of secondary or tertiary compared to them. So
mm,
there's less space for children to be able to say what they need to say or to stand up. But then also in our communities, children are not taught about boundaries or body safety or consent. Those topics are considered to be taboos, almost like if we bring up this topic, then it's going to make our children be more sexual, when that's not really the case. It
mm,
allows, of course, age appropriately, if we're able to teach our children that, it allows for them to have the words to use when they need to reach out for help if something happens, or even if something makes them uncomfortable.
mm.
But in this case, there is none of that. That's not really what's happening here at all.
Yeah. I found it really interesting how when the characters were talking about what had happened, there was like a muting in the show.
Mm,
Like you
yes,
didn't
yes,
actually,
right,
we didn't actually hear
right. The
what it was that
conversation.
happened. So
Yes,
even I was sort of left questioning, like, what exactly was it? And after a
yeah,
while, you kind of get the idea, but you're left to sort of
right,
kind of put those pieces together yourself. And I did think maybe that could have been something that maybe
yeah,
was addressed more explicitly.
yes.
That would have
I
been
agree.
very helpful because, again, it still sort of feeds into this shame, stigma,
Yes,
taboo around
exactly.
these kind of topics. And
Yeah.
I think that was a missed opportunity, but maybe it's a reflection of where the culture and
Oh,
community
yeah.
are at the moment. Um,
Right.
a little bit of a different angle on that. Again, with Lela's character, it shows that, having somebody coming in from the outside,
Mm.
they can see things from a different perspective. And she was the only one that picked up on
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
actually gave care and attention to Sidra's
Mhm.
behavior. That's all Sidra needed.
I think Lela was very attuned to what was happening within Sidra. She was able to pick up on signs, and it seemed like she knew what to watch out for. And
Mm,
she did try to bring up the conversation with Gis, but he kind of dismissed her, and said that that's not, there's no way that that's happening. And unfortunately, things escalated, and when it all just blew up is when everybody else found out.
yeah.
But I
Which
think
was
this
also interesting
entire
'cause that it was another hearing it from another male,
yes,
which actually
right.
made him act
Mhm.
on
Mhm.
the danger. And
Right.
I mean, yeah, which again was it was a bit frustrating, but it does also show that, a man's voice is
Yeah.
given more power.
Right. Right, 100%. And like you said, them muting even those conversations, I think that just like if there was some room for growth, I would say,
Mm,
for the show itself. I was wondering if they were going to state it as explicitly, but the fact that they muted it was just a sign that, hey, is Pakistan ready to have this conversation so
mm.
openly? I don't know. It would be wonderful to have people learn the words. Oh, here's my accent coming out. Of course, it's going to happen at some point. But it's important for people to learn the appropriate words to use so that they can reach out for help. I think there's this cycle of silence that exists within our communities, that
Mhm.
talking about difficult topics is very much taboo, like this one, and that's why it's resulting in those muting difficult conversations that continue to get seen. And some of this comes from our own past, like historically, what the South Asian community has gone through with
Mm.
colonization and the partition, which was not too long ago. A lot of our grandparents have been through it. Even my own have been through the partition of India and having to migrate, leave everything behind to create a new life through very tumultuous and violent times.
Mm.
That is something that most of our grandparents don't talk about. Most of our families don't talk about. It's the idea of, yeah, we went through that, but let's move forward. What's the point of talking about past things? Even that statement itself is something that is said many, many times throughout the show. Like
Mm.
when Sidra's mom goes through her own, I think someone breaks into the house and they steal things, and then the husband says, "Don't talk about these painful things. Let's try to move forward." But it really comes from that same kind of survival strategy, which is, this happened in the past, so we're not going to bring it up.
Yeah.
And we see that live within the larger South Asian community, and a lot of folks that show up to therapy talk about the same kind of difficulty
Yeah.
of talking about difficult things, or even that's why we don't know how to have difficult conversations. So it feels like the only option there is to just completely step away or completely lose yourself.
Yeah. There's like a real avoidance around difficult topics, and
Mhm.
in the phrases that are quite common, like in the show, but also in our culture, that, oh, don't think about it too much, or, just move forward, and,
Mhm.
just be grateful. And, you
Right.
know, there's a lot of sayings that we have that people try and live by, that actually avoid and dismiss
Mhm.
emotions,
Mhm.
struggles, but actually it's through addressing and facing those struggles that we're actually going to move forward.
Right, exactly. And that's the lessons that we're learning through towards kind of the, I don't even know if the show's going to end anytime soon, but where we're at in the show itself, episode 20 something, we kind of start seeing that change in, hey, when we talk about these things, that's when healing actually can happen.
Mm.
And when we have space from the messiness of it all, sometimes when that stops for a little bit, then there is some room for growth or some room for something different. And I think that that's something that's important to mention here, particularly with Sidra's case. She says she doesn't want to go back into that home. She tries to advocate. Once she's left that space, she advocates for herself and says, I don't want to return to that. We even see her flourishing in this new
Yeah.
space. And for some folks, that is the reality. I did want to mention this, that while it is important for us to maintain our family ties, and that's something that's so valuable in our communities, in certain cases, people might decide to not rekindle those relationships with people that have hurt them. And that's totally okay, especially in cases like abuse
Mm.
of such kind, or any type of abuse, honestly. For us to expect people to go back into those environments is something that we really have to be careful about.
Yeah. And I really love how it's one of the grandchildren that does this. So this is Faisal, who's the son of, I guess, his sister.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously she doesn't live at home, but I feel like he has such amazing words of wisdom, and I think
Mm-hmm.
he's a very strong character that represents
Yes.
the next generation in terms of their
Yes.
thinking and the challenging of the status quo. And
Mm-hmm.
because it's his mum that mentions about Zishan getting married to Sidra, and he's
Mm-hmm.
obviously very baffled by this and
Mm-hmm.
questions her, that, actually it's the person that Sidra hates the most right now
Yes.
is the one
Right.
that you're gonna suggest for marriage to her.
Right.
It's important that we do listen to the voice of the younger generation as well. And I mean, we see the generational gap here, where when the grandkids do challenge the elders,
Mm-hmm.
they do get shut down quite often.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it also shows a real difference, and a willingness to vocalize that difference as well,
Mhm,
more easily in the younger
mhm,
generation than the older one. Their approaches to difficult conversations and difficult
mhm,
experiences, like the abuse, are just really telling of the differences
mhm.
between the generations.
I'm with you on that.
So yeah, we will wrap up because we have
We
to
could keep
stop at
talking about
some
this
point.
forever. Yes.
um, I'm just wondering if there was any sort of concluding comments or remarks that you wanted to share before we finish?
Yeah, I wanted people to really take away from this podcast and this show that we don't have to stay stuck in the ways of operating that are so deeply painful to us, that we do have the agency to create change in the dynamics that we live in. Sometimes that comes from our own change, sometimes that results in the change of the extended system. But we do have options. There are ways to create more interdependent type of living format. not one that you have to lose yourself in, not one that just focuses on you, but one that really feels grounded in your values and also holds on to your sense of self, allows you to have space to be make the choices that you might need to make, you know.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. I would echo that as well. There's a lot to consider as an individual in a system in terms of how much you know yourself and the kind of change that you want to make as well. And even though change, it usually comes with some initial struggles and resistance, but it can lead somewhere else. Like the
Mm-hmm.
change after through that struggle is possible,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole system adjusts to it as well in their own way. Um, I think the thing that I probably would want to highlight as well is around loyalty. Um, that often we are loyal to people and things without even questioning. So that's
Mm-hmm.
something I would probably remind people of, is just asking yourselves that, who and what am I loyal to, or being loyal to when I'm saying XYZ, or when I'm choosing to do XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
Because we do have a lot of blind loyalty, and we see that through the generations in this show, but actually questioning where that's coming from and coming back to your own agency and choice.
Mm. Mhm. I love that. I love that. I've appreciated doing this together with you. I'm so glad that we were able to have this conversation, and I hope that people found this to be helpful for them. I hope they felt seen. I hope they felt like they could really take away something from this podcast episode that they can really implement in their lives and create more of that connected way of living.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me and actually extending the invitation for
Of
doing this
course.
together. I've, yeah, really enjoyed it. Enjoyed more than I thought I would watching the series as
Yeah.
well, which I will continue to do
Yeah.
until it finishes. But yeah, thank you so much. It's been really valuable just hearing everything that you've had to share and your perspectives on this from a psychological lens. And I'm sure it's
Mhm.
going to be really valuable to everyone who's listening. So thank you so much for, yeah, your expertise, your opinions, and your insights.